Hey, it's Mitchell Millennial, and this is my preview of the Nikon D850. I'm wearing sunglasses right now because I have a couple of lume cubes helping illuminate me. They are super bright, and I wasn't able to look at my notes without wearing sunglasses. But let's go ahead. The D850 was just announced today. I made a video a few months back called What I Need from Nikon, which is basically where I laid out the specs that I wanted to see on the D750 successor and just what I wanted to see in regards to a commitment to video from Nikon. And with the D850 that was announced today, it definitely checks a lot of those boxes. Real quick, some specs. It has a 45 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor, which I believe is the first BSI sensor in a full frame DSLR. What that means is increased dynamic range, increased low light sensitivity, which is really signal to noise ratio, even at a higher resolution. It also has the same pixel pitch as the D500, and it seems as if this is a completely Nikon engineered sensor. It has a native ISO of 64 all the way up to 25,600, that which is available in video, so video shooters can go ahead and drop their ISO below 100. It's got a 153-point AF system from the Nikon D5, with 99 of those being cross type, and we have 6 frames per second with the electronic shutter in full resolution. Now this is important, this electronic shutter, and I'll get to it in another specification, but it's got XQD and UHS 2 for faster transfer speeds, which is great for that 4K video, which we'll get to in a second. There's no GPS. It was definitely a little bit disappointing to hear that, although from my point of view, I could see GPS being a feature that Nikon left out for battery efficiency reasons. Still, that can be disabled, so I don't really understand why Nikon would skimp on this, but if they were going to skimp on a specification, I am more than happy with them not including GPS. We have focus stacking of up to 300 images for people that want to do macro photography. We have 8K camera time-lapse. Now, I know a couple of professional time-lapse photographers who are constantly going through bodies because the shutter is failing because they're doing time-lapse so much. Well, what Nikon has done is they've given the D850 an electronic shutter which allows you to take the same quality of images that you would using a mechanical shutter, right? But with an electronic shutter, if you look at the brochure and the Nikon's wording for their 4K in this camera, they are directly taking shots, in my opinion, at Canon. They place a huge emphasis on the lack of crop in 4K on top of their selection of wide-angle prime lenses, and specifically talk about how this is a non-cropped 4K experience and the benefits of being able to shoot wide and shallow depth of field. They highlight their 20mm 1.4, their 20mm 1.8, which I have, their 24mm 1.4, and their 28mm 1.4 as key lenses to give you this effect, which to someone like myself, I'm directly reading that as them firing shots at the 5D Mark IV, not having full frame 4K video. Now they're using a 422 codec in H.264. This could be something that we see updated down the line, since it does appear that the D850 has more processing power than the D5. While Nikon necessarily doesn't have the greatest reputation for firmware updates, I see the D850 as a platform that is so powerful that Nikon continues to invest its resources into updating that firmware and adding new features to this camera later down the line. It's going to have a 1080p at 120 frames per second, but that's actually recorded at 24 frames a second in 1080p. So it's not, it is true 1080p at 120 frames a second, but it's being recorded at 24 frames a second, so there's no sound. The DJI Osmo Plus, which I'm filming this on, does something similar for slow motion, And I wish that Nikon had given us a clean 120 FPS HD video. To touch more on the video highlights, we have focus peaking, which is huge. We have zebras. We have, again, mediocre autofocus. Nikon still doesn't have an autofocus system that can compete with the dual pixel AF that Canon has. So to really get into the part of this video that I was excited to, which is what does this mean for the direction of Nikon? And I am really pleased to say that I like the way Nikon is looking. It's been a big criticism of Nikon and Canon that they haven't been packing the same kind of their DSLRs that Sony and Fujifilm have been doing. And really with the D850, it's kind of like a resurgence of that HD DSLRs can still be bleeding edge in regards to their technology, the features they have. And on top of that, you're not going to have to compromise with autofocus the way you would in an A7S Mark II or an A7R Mark II. The A9 is still going to have comparable focusing capabilities to this camera because it has similar focusing capabilities to the Nikon D5, but that camera costs more than this. I really think that Nikon put a lot into this camera. At this point, I don't see a reason other than sports to need a Nikon D5. Another reason that I'm genuinely excited to see this camera from Nikon is it looks like Nikon is committing towards providing versatile equipment for its users. This camera is going to have so much flexibility in regards to being able to use it for sports, wildlife, nature. I mean, that's a lot of cropping power that you have with 45 megapixels. It's got an incredible AF system. It's got incredible video. It's got incredible, or what should be incredible high ISO video because of the BSI sensor and the improved signal to noise ratio along with the gapless micro lenses. So really, it doesn't look like Nikon made a whole lot of compromises when they made this camera. Now, personally, I can say that this will more likely than not be my next camera body, unless whatever comes out for the D750 has similar video. I would love to see the video in the D850 trickle down to the D750 line, and I would love to see a 30 megapixel D750, which is even better than this in low light and at lower resolution or something along those lines. And it's going to be really interesting to see what Nikon does with the D750 line, being that that was kind of like the Nikon all-arounder camera for a lot of different professionals. So I think that with the release of the D850, we can actually learn a lot about the future of the D750 line. It'll probably have somewhere like 30 megapixels, maybe a slightly lower end AF type, probably a slower burst rate, and more likely than not, a 20 to 25 image buffer. I'd be curious to see how this camera is going to affect the sales of the D5, being that it does a lot of what the D5 does, and being that the D5 really is sacrificing low ISO dynamic range for high ISO dynamic range. It's really interesting to be a photographer right now, and there's a lot of great cameras on the market, and I'm really happy to see that Nikon stepped up to the plate with this camera and didn't back away from the competition that Sony is giving them right now. Till next time, guys, if you are looking to pre-order a D850, I'd love to hear what you're going to be using it for.